So we brought our book, that's sort of how this talk started, but it's a farm memoir book from our tenure in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, which is a small town between King of Prussia and Westchester, kind of along the 202 corridor. It was part of the William Penn land grant in the 1600s. It was a dairy town throughout most of the 19th century, and then became, maybe after, during the war, started to suburbanize more. And in our 20-something years in Chester Springs, we always called it farming at the metropolitan edge. You know, that we went west, we were in Lancaster with the Amish and Mennonite communities, with quite a lot of farming there. If we went east, we were going in the technology corridor, pharmaceuticals and technology, and eventually Philadelphia. So we kind of were in between. And that was a blessing and a curse. I mean, they gave us access to a lot of markets and good customers, had a lot of expertise in the Amish community for fixing things and producing metalwork and woodwork. But then we also had neighbors who would come by the farm and ask us what kind of dogs those were. They were referring to the goats because they were city people. And this whole idea of having a goat in the neighborhood was really confusing. And so we were there for 2001 to 22, and then we moved to Boston, to Talbot County, in 2022. So we've been here 3 years, and that gave us time to think about our journey on the farm and come up with this farm memoir book. Many people who've known us over the decades kept telling us to write a book. The book started, I think, in 2008. But it was remained on the computer, and we got busier and busier. We almost had a book deal with the woman who was the agent for Marley and me, the dog, but she was concerned that we had two voices, and that she wanted us to have one or the other write the book. And we said, no, the whole story is about two of us. You can't have one or the other. We had a professional disagreement, but politely and hard ways. No hard feelings, but that postponed this whole thing. So after we moved here, it was kind of in the middle of COVID and turmoil, things. Finally got the book published last year. So has anybody read the book? Good, okay, no problem. This is sort of you might be inspired to read the book, or you might think, agri-tainment, I got it all, no problem. Either way is fine. But so the title is Grass Always Greener because that reflects our life change, life-changing chapters at the farm. We both had pre-farm lives and then came to the farm together. But of the three words, goats, gardens, and gourmet cheese, which one are you here for?
Cheese.
Cheese. All of the above? Okay. Well, we hope you'll enjoy the story. And this is a great group. We really like this kind of thing because you can talk to us. We don't read, we talk. So you can interrupt. You can raise your hand, you can clap, you can yell. Be part of the presentation.
So what was your background before?
Yeah, good question. What did you pick this up? Sorry.
Life has its strange turns. Like my background is as a microbiologist, so I had a science background. I was going to be a research microbiologist. I was actually doing cancer research and decided I really didn't enjoy that. So I got into the biotech industry and went to the pharmaceutical industry. So I never really technically used my microbiology. And then this opportunity came along with our farm, and making cheese is all microbiology. So for me, it was a full circle.
My background is a little bit, I call myself the professional generalist. I've done a little bit of everything, but I grew up around horses, and those were really the fondest days. I loved being in the barn, hay, muck, you name it, fur, all four legs and fur were my thing. But then, got a job, tried to be a productive adult, and I had worked in architecture for a bit and was enjoying it, and some long stories, but some great things, but then ended up in financial services, trying to increase my income. And that worked from the income point of view, but it was not satisfying to my soul. And so when we bought the farm and Al and I were married, opportunity arose for me to leave my corporate job, my desk job, and I embraced it. not really, that's how this sort of story started without an ending. Like, I don't know what's going to happen next, but here we are. And so I did. And we'll start the
video.
That's a good place to start the video.
Subliminal, some of it's like cheerleading, you want to be a booster for the area you live in that you're proud of. Some of it's tactical, it's on your tongue. It's what you get.
One of my favorite stories is we met with an Italian gentleman in the Alba region of Italy. We were interested in one of the cheeses he was making. We asked him if he would give us the recipe. So we were there for most of the day. He gave us a tour of the property. He cooked us a wonderful lunch. And then he started talking about this particular cheese that we were interested in making here. And we diligently wrote down all the facts and how to do it. And then at the end of the day, he said, I'm really happy to give you this information. He says, but you're never going to be able to go home and make this cheese. He said, what I suggest is you go home and make your own cheese. And that was something that really hit home for us emotionally, that why go out and copy what somebody else is doing? Go home and be inspired by your surroundings and make something that's really true to your own farm.
Something that accentuates your terroir, your animals, your pasture, your seasonality, your palate, it's very personal, it's art. Artisan cheese is art.
What we try to do here is to use our native plant material in our cheese making so that we're connecting the landscape with the foodscape, because the goats and the plants and the cheese and the milk is all connected, so that it's more of a sort of a holistic view in terms of how we manage our farm efforts.
100 years ago, everybody would have done that.
We really embrace the idea of coming back and making our own cheese, and that really, I think, has helped our cheeses stand out from others.
Now you can farm. This farm is beautiful. And Boston.
Now you're in control.
Yep.
So we talked about this a little bit late before the forum, and I think the one thing that we didn't mention is that we did have shared, like growing up in Chester County, PA, I really loved old farmhouses, the 1800s and 1700s. And so I was really interested in buying an old farmhouse. Catherine, who's been around farms and animals all her life, really was interested in the farm. And she was also interested in the environment. She would send me articles about conserving land and the benefit of that, both in terms of preserving land in perpetuity and also the economic value to the community of having open space. So we kind of combine those interests together, and that's what we can do with our farm.
And I think we both have Italian-American heritage. Our grandparents, 4 of them, 8 of them, depending on how you count, were immigrants from Italy. And in the Italian culture, you don't think about it, but food is love. Our families made food, and on 3 levels in 3 kitchens every Sunday, every Monday. There really was, so the idea of, when we first started the farm, we started a plant nursery, and that was fine, a few edible plants. And we made connections, and that spoke to my design interest, and that was important. But the sharing of the food brought the connection to a whole new level when we were able to sit at the table with our neighbors and our community members and our customers. It made a big difference. So it brought together some ideas that were not really part of our career or education, but something from our soul.
I think the one key thing, once we bought the farm in 2001, we were both still in corporate. I was traveling a lot. We both traveled a lot, and some of it was international. And we were both in our respective offices off-site, and 9/11 happened. And of course, that was traumatic. We both came home, and at the time, we didn't have our TV hooked up yet.
Yeah, we'd only lived there 60 or 80 days, let it happen.
And we couldn't get the cable, and the antenna was working. It was a big mess. So all we could see was the fuzzy screen. So we kind of knew what was going on from work, and then we came home. And we were sitting out on that front porch with I think our dogs at the time, and our cats. And the airspace was closed at that point. And several military jets went overhead.
Because there was the whole shank still Pennsylvania, so there was definitely military traffic around.
Other than that, it was dead quiet, and it was surreal. And I think at that point, that was a life-changing moment for us in the sense that we didn't want to go through this anymore. We were both doing a lot of traveling. I was on one of the first flights out of Philadelphia to London, because I was working for an Olympic-based company. I was one of the few people on an international flight. There must have been maybe a dozen of us.
Mostly
Airport
airports.
trustee came home and said, we wanted to do something together. We didn't have a grand plan for this. If we moved to the farm, we weren't thinking about a native plant nursery. We weren't thinking about a goat cheese.
We thought it was a retirement project.
Yeah, that's what we would do after we had our corporate jobs. But we realized that it's not what we wanted. We weren't completely satisfied with our corporate jobs. So we thought, why don't we bring back the legacy of this 1830s farm? It used to be a dairy farm with a lot more land, had been subdivided multiple times. We had 8 acres, so it wasn't very big. So you really couldn't have a cow dairy anymore, but we thought we could have a goat dairy. And between that and the land conservation, when we put a conservation easement on our property, they did a plant survey. And that's the winter scene that we had from our dining room. So they did a plant survey, and about a third of the plants weren't native. A third of the plants were native. And first, so we thought that's a great opportunity. Let's try to restore the property with native species. So we were juggling those two ideas while we were still working. And when we looked into the possibility of doing a goat dairy, the regulations were onerous. They wanted us to put a new septic system in. There was all these requirements. It was just going to be way too expensive. Whereas the native plant nursery, we could put together a hoop house, buy some starters, and for economic reasons, we decided that the plant nursery.
I think the first native plant nursery license was either $30 or $40, but let's just say it was affordable. The dairy, the first meeting with the Pennsylvania Dairy Department of Agriculture guy, we were well into 6 figures in the first 10 minutes. And I'm like, well, maybe not. So the nursery became a way to put your toe in the water. Let's see how this feels. So the conservation easement was a voluntary conservation easement that we chose to donate. Because I've grown up around the horse thing, I've spent much time in Middleburg, Virginia, where I've been exposed to a lot of this idea of the equestrian community, conserving land, and about creating the open space for fox hunts, or trail rides, whatever. And then when I moved to Pennsylvania, I also there was some of that going on there too, in Unionville, King Ranch, and I had to sort of create work in financial services. So I knew about the tax benefits and all this. So I thought, well, we could do this. We're not the richest people. We don't own the most land, but we can contribute to this policy. And so we said, well, that's what we're going to start with, because they won't build barns and houses like that ever again. So if we don't conserve this, it's over. So why don't we conserve it? And so we did. Without, again, really knowing where we go, but let's just start with doing something good. And then we'll see if more good follows after that. As we move on, we'll take you on our cheese journeys, where we got exposure to making cheese, and then the community that built that meadow there is in front of a millet and Selma, which is a mill in Chester Springs, a former grist mill that they do operate now a little bit like the wine mill. It was a demonstration mill, and they sell some products. But that was one of our landscape projects that we were, it was partially grant funded, but we also mixture of payment and philanthropy to create that meadow in front of the mill. So we always loved that. It was a couple miles from the farm. The stewardship then moved into this idea. I became a volunteer on the land trust in the region for all those decades, and continue a couple of land trusts. worked to create the open space income tax, to create a perpetual fund for the county and for the township to preserve land, which continues, and also for the agricultural security area, which protected farmers from nuisance suits. So in other words, once we joined the agricultural security area, we could not be sued for odors, noises, all the kinds of things that city people who move out to the country are worried about. Of course, negligence is still a crime, but it protected us from the people who didn't like the color of our flowers. And although many of our neighbors were supportive and lovely, it's the, I don't know, it wasn't quite 80-20. I would say it was like one bad apple, maybe two. But we really got a lot of support, but also benefited and needed, frankly, the protection from the agricultural security area because of misunderstanding. When people learn more, they understand more, but it's not always linear. We then did do some of the other sustainable practices, composting, solar panels, rain gardens, and really tried to preserve. This is Pickering Creek. We were in the Pickering Creek watershed, which is a high quality stream in Pennsylvania. Exceptional value is the highest quality. Our adjacent stream, the French Creek, is exceptional value. I petitioned for this one to be upgraded, and politics is tough. I decided I would never run for election. But it still did good, just not the highest level of protection. That would have been maybe a couple weeks from now as the red bud trees bloom. The farm in the spring was always very special. So the first business on the farm, as you mentioned, was the plant nursery. When Al and I got married, we were both sort of gardeners, in this sort of Italian family background. Al had taken some classes at Longwood Gardens and had a beautiful garden. And I had thought gardening was part of just the hands in the dirt. To say that my sister is a fashion designer and I'm not is kind of explains it. I was always dirty, and she was always wearing white things, leathers and stuff. So I was always the kid in the dirt, and always gardens, even before we were married. So then this sort of just seemed natural to me that we would continue to garden and to have the native plant nursery. I think what was surprising to me is there's nothing native about a black plastic pot. And learning to grow things in a black plastic pot was very different than learning to grow things in the soil. And that was a whole change of time for us. Also to learn about having a hoop house, basically one of those plastic or fabric covered things. It's not quite a classic greenhouse. That's a chapter in the book. The first hoop house, even though I'd studied architecture, let's just say it wasn't easy to get this thing to stand. And I think 2 hoop houses fell. And then, once burned, twice learned, there was no 3rd hoop house. But we did end up doing a lot of conservation landscaping projects. What we learned is that if we just did this on our 8 acres or so, it wouldn't change the world much. But in our county, if we reached out to another couple of hundred landowners over 20 years and had native plant and ecology and habitat building projects in those places, then we started to create corridors of ecology and conservation and landscape. And that made a difference, I believe. And, in perpetuity, like those places will exist when I'm not here. And so when we do drive around, we often go back to, even if we're not able to enter the property, at least from the road, some people still love us. But it's great to see the plants mature. They're like our kids.
I think this was also, we started to realize, you don't really think about what's going to happen downstream, but our integration into the community changed. It was, intimate is probably not the greatest word, but we started making more connections with people, and there was a give and take. We would help them, they would help us, and it was, we did some work outside of our immediate area, but the interactions with our local community started to grow. We started getting involved more. We did some volunteer work. They came to the farm. We had open farm days.
We did talks at schools.
And early on, we started, even though we didn't have a goat cheese business, we started, we had our first goat probably in 2004, so maybe 3 or 4 years after we went there. So when we had our open farm days with the native plant nursery, We did have a few baby goats running around. So we didn't know it then, but that was sort of the seed that started to germinate for, not only the community, but for our farm too.
Yeah, so this was the genesis of the farm business, and in 2004-ish, I left my corporate job and was able to use the native plants to do landscape design, and we had crew and we did installation projects, and that became a business. That was kind of nice. By 2006, Al thought I might be having too much fun. And then we had to pull out the spreadsheets and figure out how we could read his corporate job.
Did you do landscape design for the suburbans that were coming into the area or for the other farm?
Mostly for homeowners. Some were coming into the area, some had been there. I say it's a bit of a we did some school projects, a couple of corporate, office park kind of places. Some were mandated by township or building codes to use native plants. Others were voluntary. We worked on some Superfund sites, which was fascinating, where they were more like Upper New Jersey, where they were taking over old industrial sites, and we did some things like that. We did a couple of campuses for schools and universities. So it was a pretty big mix of, but I'm going to say it's sort of a self-selecting group. The people who hired you to do that already are on board. A couple of times we were asked to consult to HOAs for homeowners associations for new developments. Those never went because, kind of the reason that I don't want to stereotype, because I'm sure there's differences, but the ones that we were involved with, the majority of the people really didn't want this. They wanted no dandelions. They wanted control. They wanted clean edges. And when we offered these solutions, it was like asking them to do cartwheels, like, why? They weren't really. So there was a minority. So we did better. We were better matched often for people who had already learned a little bit about the why, and then they were interested in the how. And we could provide the how. They already believed in the why.
We did have bees on our property. We had up to 7 hives. This was early on, before we had a lot of goats. We thought it was a good connection with the pollinators and people wanting to do rain gardens and pollinator gardens and attract birds. So it was really a nice fit. It was a wonderful experience for me. I loved working with the bees. I liked harvesting the honey. You see there. But after a few years and our herd was growing and our plant business was growing, it really just got to be too much to manage. And then the reality of it is, bees are susceptible to certain diseases. And overwintering them in Pennsylvania wasn't easy. We would sometimes lose 50% of our hives. So you're starting over.
It wasn't a good business model.
Yeah.
It was a good hobby.
People that do other things with honey rather than sell the honey itself, adding value to it, whether putting it into soaps or lotions, that kind of thing, is really more profitable than just selling raw honey. This was our patio. So after about 5 to 10 years, we had these beautiful, mature, perennial gardens.
That was one of my first landscape design projects.
And that is a cobweb in the background there. I always wanted to cook on an open fire, so we built this cobweb, which was basically straw from the farm as well as clay. So Pennsylvania has a lot of clay.
All that.
So we put it together and we built this. We did have help. But it was a beautiful structure. We made pizzas. We made a whole Thanksgiving dinner in it one year.
Multiple courses over 2 days. It was fabulous.
And this is where we came at the end of the day when we really needed a glass of wine and some cheese. This was it was like our little cocoon where nobody could get to us.
We joked that, everybody talks about habitat and building a space one of the species on the farm was humans. So we had to make sure there was a comfortable space and food and shelter for the humans too, and that's where the patio came from.
So did the patio come with the house, or did you build that?
No, we built it. I mean, that was what's
old.
And we used the stone.
Yes,
so the stone, every time we would till a field, 4 tons of stone came out. The house is built from field stone of that place. They didn't bring that on a triaxle. That stone came from that farm. And you see the house and the barn in the photos. So as we started to till and move things around, tons of stone came out of the ground and we were collecting it. And so those are all dry lake walls with stone from the farm For the flat patio surface, we had to buy some stone because we didn't have enough large pieces that were flat enough. We used some that we found, but we wouldn't have had enough. So yeah, that was, so you could, well, it's hard to see a little bit, but there's a slope down from the back to where we're sitting. And so when we first moved there, the basement was flooded. It was water down the hill, basement. And okay, so every project, all good designs usually are problem solved. Because if you don't have a problem, you don't know what to solve. So I was like, okay, we have to change the grate here so we don't get all the water in the basement. So we built those walls and put French drains behind them, and that moved the water away from the house. But that also gave us an opportunity to landscape the border and create sitting area. So it's fun. I think that's it. When people would come to the farm, I didn't really intend to be a landscape designer, but then they'd say, can you do something with that? And it was kind of like that. So these are some of our beautiful coneflowers, swelltails. This was our first little meadow. Meadow is not native to any place on the East Coast. It's really a prairie thing from the Midwest, from Wisconsin. But having the beehives, we wanted to create what I call naturalistic meadows. So naturalistic is in the vein of nature, but it's not actually what nature would do. It's like imitating or copying nature. So meadow is sort of a naturalistic project, not a natural project. But we did do that, and our bees liked it. And that became a meadow at a client's site when there were, so once we had that little demonstration, then others would be interested, and we were able to implement that. And this was a wonderful project. You don't want to see part of it here, but this had been an abandoned horse project, horse pasture, and the client called me and said, can you create a woodland? I was like, well, sort of. So I went over and looked, and I said, well, the first thing you need is an almost scary number of triaxle trucks full of soil, because all the topsoil had washed away and eroded. And I said, so I did a little bit of math. It was well into the 5 figures. I said, this is your investment in soil. Are you prepared to do this before we plant? They said, yes. So I said, okay. And long story, that was a 1 year, 1 summer, 1 season's project, but we planted, I don't know, hundreds of trees and shrubs, and then this sort of rain garden in the front. And that's one we go back to at least every year to see. And it's great, really satisfying project of using 3 layers of shrubs, trees, and perennials.
Urban farm days were fun. That's Clinton Rugby on the left there.
Both rescues.
They're both rescues. Customer service, chasing deer. They had a lot of different jobs. They were pretty good at it. But these are really hard days for us in terms of getting the farm ready, especially after winter, and trying to get the farm looking good, because we had a lot of demonstration, our own beds, but we had to get them ready. But it was a lot of fun to have people come.
Mother's Day was always the biggest weekend, and we did usually 2 or 3 weekends in May, 2 in September. And then a couple other things, but Mother's Day was huge. And the satisfaction of Mother's Day was the multi-generations. We commonly had 2 or 3 generations of families, grandmother, mother, child, or something like that, come for Mother's Day. And then over 20-something years, we saw more born, and then we saw those that were born in our space become these college directed, and one went to the military, the Naval Academy. So all kinds of, we called that the unexpected crop of the farm. It was a good one.
There's that hoop house.
There's the one that was still standing. Wind, snow, a lot of things can go wrong. The community involvement, was mentioning, the CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. We did have a CSA at our farm where we sold shares, but for the cheese, but it didn't quite get your head around the hundreds of people who support the farm, and that was life-changing. Those relationships stand today. September, we're going to a wedding for one of our high schoolers who volunteered at the farm, and she went to college, and anyway, she works in DC now and trying to do good for the world. We wish her well. We have some who are involved in DEP type work, EPA, a few nurse midwives who worked with goats and then decided to deliver human children. So they've made us proud in all parts of the world and the country. But it was that community connection that made it important.
So the goat dairy, so we now we're getting up to 2007, 2008, and we were growing our herd, not really knowing what we were going to do.
The first goats came because a neighbor had extras and her kids had gone to college and she was like, maybe you should take a couple of goats.
So it's like potato chips. You can't have it somewhere. And it's pretty addictive when the babies come, and they're just fun to play with. And we were drinking the milk. We were milking them every day. But what happened in 2008, we had the recession.
That's Rena and Rebecca, just the first two goats for them, of course.
And when we got to the recession, like we were actually really busy doing, conservation landscaping projects. And, we were pretty busy, but we realized then that, the business was really going to fall off. It's a discretionary income type of.
And most of our projects were pretty big tickets. I mean, they were thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So, recession was going to notice, or they were going to feel it.
So we were able to sort of get through the winter, even though the nursery shut down, we weren't selling any plants, like we didn't really have any income between, November and April. So that was a challenge. And then when the recession came, it really became a challenge. So even though we had some jobs that were carrying over into the next year, we thought at that point we better talk to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture to see if we can revive this idea of a goat cheese operation, because that would give us revenue.
Cavell was going to really quit his job, which at that point he did, I believe.
Yeah.
We thought, okay, now we need multiple income streams because this isn't going to last forever.
So the good news is when the regulators came out, I think it was
The next group, they don't last
You have to
forever.
wait a couple
Keep
years.
asking the same question and get a different answer.
So it was the head of the PDA came out with the executive director from the Pennsylvania Ag Sustainable Association. And they really were trying to get farmers to go to dairy because
Pennsylvania was losing
they're
dairy.
losing a lot of dairies, like tens and tens every year. And it's just because they were selling raw milk. So we wanted to do cheese and they were trying to encourage that. It was like a 180 change. They said, we want to help you do this. You do not need to put in new septic systems. We will work with you. So that changed the whole game in terms of us doing this. It became more economical. We still had a ton of work to do. We had this old barn that still had the horse and cow stalls in there from
Dirt
back then.
floor.
So it was a big project, but we knew then we had to do something in order to sustain ourselves and keep the farm going.
By then we were, in love with the farm. And the farm became a product of our marriage. We never had children, knew at that point we weren't going to have children. So this farm was our family. And it became in our souls. We had to take care of this farm.
And I think we were making cheese at that point. Typically
We were making cheese for friends and family. We had no.
we weren't selling anything, but we would, whatever was left over after a week, we would just make either salt cheese or eat something.
And we'd bring it to a party or, something like that. It was just for fun, but we were playing enough to taste what might happen. And once you taste it, you're in. This is little Rena you saw in the last picture. She was a quad machine. So, Rena was the matriarch of the farm, and she was a great mom. And, most goats have 2 kids, sometimes 3, sometimes 1. Rena loved to make quads. And she raised them. Chloe was an important part of the farm, too. So we always had cats and dogs. And Chloe, you see on the left, she's with, I think that's Cascade and Peekaboo over there with her, Daphne. And she would knead on their pregnant bellies. And it was such a beautiful sight to see the symbiotic relationship.
She knew how to keep warm.
And she knew how to make them calm. So she was definitely a part of the farm, although we never milked Chloe.
And she thanks you.
Yeah. And, we always joke that this definitely, today, there would have been goats born on the farm. The 1st of March was the peak of kidding season. And it was a 24/7 thing. I was the midwife for thousands of goat births. And you learn a lot. But it's a 24/7 thing. One year, I can't remember the year, but I got shingles during goat birding because it was so stressful. You know, they kept getting turned upside down, the weather was bad, and I just kept working, you know, there was no way to, but it kind of brought to my attention, gosh, this is stressful. And I need to figure out a way to get a little bit of help because I'm just overdone with this, but you know, it's fine. Not to be a martyr, but that's the amount of, you can become emotionally and physically spent from the 24/7 thing for 6 weeks at a time. So but it's beautiful. If you don't think a goat kid is cute, we got a problem here. You don't have to want one, but they are cute.
Did you have veterinarians involved?
So we had a wonderful veterinarian who was a single practitioner who was very, very good. But, you know, she was a single practitioner who covered, you know, 100 square miles. And, you know, you could really not count on her coming. And she knew that and we knew that. So the idea was to make the customers, clients, whatever, self-sufficient. And so we had a slew of, you know, medications and tools and things on hand. We were ready. She was generous in teaching. I could always call her 24/7. She was, you know, which I tried to never do. She was raising 2 children as a single mom. I was like, well, you know, I should look at 5 o'clock and decide I'm going to make it through the night without it. Call her, you know, at dinner time if I need something that I can wait till the morning. And I don't think there was only one time that I ever called her, like after dinner time, because I realized, you know, it's my job to become mostly self-sufficient, but without her tutelage, I would have not become. But I can't tell you how many times at the beginning when I had less experience that I had my left hand on the cell phone and my right hand in the goat. And I'm like, okay, Missy, I got this. What do you think I should do? And turn to the left, 30 degrees. Okay. And I learned a lot. In the end, sometimes, frankly, you know, Missy would call me when she was having a complication with a goat birth because I had seen so many that I had just like a database in my mind of what could go right and what could go wrong and what you could do about it. We don't have ultrasound or MRI, so you're just touch. You know, it's battlefield medicine, I used to call it. Like you have to figure it out with not much on your and do your best. And you know, we lost goats, right? That's real, but you save a lot too. So
Our first venture in birthing is you buy all these books about, you know, bird management and such. And it's always late at night. It was around 10:30 or 11, and one of the goats was going into labor. So,
wonderful.
well,
We knew that was.
so we brought the book with us. This is 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Read this video now.
So I remember I was by the lake. There was like an e-lamp there, and I was reading, and I said, "Well, it says like once the water breaks, it should be within 20 minutes." Catherine said, "Well, it's been 20 minutes, but also does it say?" Don't say anything after that. So that's like how things happen. It's just there was no book that you could go to. It's not a place.
You know, another, you know, when you got fancier books, you know, veterinary manuals, well, then you should call the veterinarian. I'm like, yeah, well, we tried that, you know, like they told us they could come in the morning, you know, well, what are we supposed to do for the next 12 hours? And you learn quick. That was April. So one of the things we had were guardians for the goats, especially the kids, because of coyotes. Coyotes eat goats. And, you know, they're terrorists, as I would say. You know, they don't just kill a goat and eat it, which would be kind of a natural process, but they kill a lot of goats, and they don't eat much. You know, so you really have to, if it was a one-time thing, you could kind of almost accept it as part of the world. But when a coyote would get into a field, they would just take down as many goats as they could, and it really wasn't about one. And so we had to guardians out in the pastures. And we talked about you might have seen the big white dogs, the Great Pyrenees with livestock guardian dogs, but the neighbors were too close. And one of the ways the dogs protect is barking. And we thought, oh God, neighbors are going to kill us if these dogs bark all night. So we decided with these donkeys, somebody said, and you know, this looks like Eeyore or you know, something that, well, April, you know, instinctively in action was awesome. she would see this, anything coming, she would go towards it, grab its neck, break its neck with her jaws.
Wow.
And if that didn't work, she would spin and kick to kill.
Wow.
And if she had, and depending on the distance, she would round the goats up. She would run a circle and get them towards the shed, and then she would go out and attack the predator head on. She was awesome. It was it was a sight to see. And people would say, like, new people, I would say, like, okay, she looks like, a Winnie the Pooh cartoon. But treat her with respect, because, she wasn't mean, but she was serious.
Did you have to train her? I mean,
No,
It's all.
not at all.
knew that she was protecting the goats.
That was
and
her
not to
job.
kill them?
And it was kind of, we were, trying to talk to people like all over the country, like, have you ever done this? What do you think we should do? We didn't know. So they said to get a female because she would have more natural nurture kind of thing. And she, was female. She'd never been a mother as far as we knew. But anyway, we got her from a zoo that was closing. And she'd been in a petting zoo or something, and they had too many donkeys. And we bought 2 donkeys. The other donkey, Kisses, was not as maternal, and Kisses did hurt a goat. I think unintentionally, but she did. And so Kisses got shipped out to a horse farm because she wasn't going to hurt a horse. She was outside, and she wasn't really mean, I think, as much as she didn't have the same maternal.
You had to be careful.
You had to be careful. Kisses got career changer. But April stuck around forever. And then when we sold the farm, we sold her to a family in New Jersey that had some small animals, and she got that was the classic.
These are the kids coming out for breakfast.
Coming out for breakfast. Come to say hi.
So, these are some of the challenges. The breed, these were Nubian goats, and they're not really that cold tolerant. And we had a lot of baby goats in the house. And our friends were kind enough to take baby goats home and just sort of nurse them along until they got strong enough. But this is our powder room.
First floor, come in the mudroom.
So we would put them in the sink and turn the warm water on, and we would try to warm them up.
And we had the blow dryer going and try to get them warm because it's their body temperature, if they're neurologically delayed, they can't regulate their body temperature. Until their body temperature is stable, you really can't feed them by mouth, because if their body temperature is too low, this food will not be digestible, they'll die. So you have to get them warm enough to get them able to eat, and that sort of first 3 to 5 days could be pretty tricky. So, and of course, ice storm, guaranteed there'll be 2 or 3 birds on an ice storm. So we had, the sheds, but the barns weren't like heated and warm. So, we put straw bales down, and they were sort of warm enough, but if you had small birth weights or really bad weather, that's what happened.
And we used heat lamps, but even with all that, it just wasn't working.
We had, we had the babysitter list, as we called it. We had neighbors with bathtubs who were willing to take goats with bottles, and we would send them with bottles and nipples and put them on the 4-hour feeding shift.
Would sign up, wouldn't you?
They still talk to us.
You guys said you never had kids.
Right. So
We had a
sometimes
lot of kids.
sometimes they would ask me that in the grocery store, how many kids do you have? They'd look at what I was buying. I was like, you don't want to know.
Humans, but.
Because part of what would happen, is, and this was lovely in my opinion, is, because of the time of year that all these goats were born, we'd get college students who were home for like spring break. And because the weather was so such exciting, they would stay over. So we would have, 2 or 3 college kids like staying in the house with us. So then I was cooking big, farm meals that they would be coming and going. So I always had like big casseroles and like spread and banana bread and cookies and lasagna going around because we had all these people coming and going and working all the time. So it was lovely and it was awesome. So it's all the things we talked about. So we realized that, that the goats were all adorable, but they needed a job, like all of us, like we gotta have income to create our retirement plan, and we had to figure out how they could be productive. So good cheese starts here.
So when we decided we wanted to do this, we had a small barn. I mean, the barn was big, but where we were going to do the cheese and milk the goats was pretty small.
A couple hundred square feet.
So we had to find a model or a benchmark that we could duplicate. So we started. We got a USDA grant at one point, so we were visiting farms in Pennsylvania to see how they did it. So we saw small farms, we saw bigger
We went
processing.
on Vermont Cheese Trail.
And then we happened to have friends in Florence, Italy, so we were going to visit them. So we decided to maybe tie in some cheese visits there and to see some cheesemakers that really had small up in the mountains. And we really wanted to see something that was rustic, where there were small batch operations, that wasn't fancy technology. I mean, we knew we weren't going to be like volume or industrial. We didn't want any of that. We wanted to really be artisanal, local, small. And so we went to the Albo region in Italy, and
This was artisanal, local, and small.
So they were using copper pots to make the cheese, small draining tables. This was their cheese operation. So they would milk the goats, come in, it would drain, and then they would package it from there. So you don't really need a lot of space. It was really encouraging. Like in the US, you can't use a copper pot to make cheese. They won't allow you.
Or a fire.
Yeah, you can't use a fire to heat up the milk. You have to have like, stainless steel and food grade equipment.
Thermometers.
So in the video, I had talked about this gentleman, Mario Galla. This is Mario Galla. So this is the gentleman we went with, and he said, you should go home and make your own cheese. Don't copy what anybody else is doing. He was a great man. I felt like I learned more from him than I did from any cheese book that I read. And we have a lot of cheese books. And
They were better than the goat burden books. A little burden information, the goat burden books were highly disciplined.
And so the cheeses were very rustic. You could see that they didn't, hear the wax of cheeses in order to not get the molds on.
They wouldn't put that in a case at Piazza. They clean them up first.
But this is really, like in Europe, they're less sensitive to the process. And if they see this at a market, and you'll see this at Italian markets and fresh markets, they just sell it this way. You just go home and you brush off, the molds. So that's essentially what we created it's called a natural rind cheese. Typically, when you take this to market, you're going to clean it up first, but you're not going to wax it.
Some cheese cases in Italy where they're, the former slide is this before they clean it up. So then they put this nice little wrap with the straw and the wax and labels. That's got its hair done. The others haven't woke up in the morning.
I always found this inspiring because it was like so artistic, so beautiful. Like you just wanted to come home and make cheese and just package it beautifully, and they just do a great job.
So after Alba, we learned a lot in Alba. But then we thought, okay, there's a big world out there. Let's go to another country and see. So we went to Portugal because we were interested. Usually wine and cheese both use the word terroir, of this earth, of this place. And we thought Portuguese wines are famous or well known for their small native grape species that are not just the typical Cabernet or whatever. And they have a lot of terroir. So let's go learn about what they're doing in Portugal. And so we went. And well, this was interesting. In Portugal, they had the EU at that point. We went in 2011-ish. And anyway, we learned there were huge grants, and they had upscaled to this sort of like very big production with a lot of government money, or went to agritourism where they were just making cheese to taste, but not really to wholesale into stores. So this was one of the places. But look how white these cheeses are. None of that mold. So in Portugal, they had an outbreak of the fever of Malta in the 1980s. And basically, it's what we learned. At the time, I was like, fever of Malta sounds exotic. But it's brucellosis in America. And the people died, from the raw milk, from the contaminated. But they had too long a time in diagnosing it. I mean, you can typically recover from that if you they know what drugs to give you. But they took a long time to die. Anyway, people in Portugal think goat cheese is dangerous because in the 1980s, which is not that long ago, still they knew people probably who were affected. So they're very conscious of keeping the cheeses white. And they even add chlorophyll to the milk to make it whiter. And it looks like that. Our cheeses with the natural rinds in Portugal would have been like thrown in the trash. People were really worried. So we learned something.
We showed them photos and they said we could never sell
Never.
that cheese here. So it was interesting.
Very interesting. Went to Uruguay because then I thought, well, hey, you know, we're Americans, but there's this other part that's America too. And the Europeans went to South America like they came to North America, immigration from France, Spain, Italy, Portugal. So let's go see what the South Americans did with the same European influences that we have here. We were supposed to go to Argentina, and that seemed like, you know, wine, terroir, let's not get to that. And I would usually plan like a year ahead for one of these trips. So I was emailing, and they told me you can't go to Argentina because they do industry. And there's no small batch producers in Argentina, they're all industrial producers. You should go to Uruguay. Well, frankly, I didn't really know how to find it on the map. I was like, yeah, is that Paraguay? I got focused on my geography, and I was like, all right, we're going to Uruguay. And we got there, and we were introduced to this woman, Rosario, who was our guide for the week. And but who are you? She said, my husband's a butcher, and I'm doing this tour thing. And I said, so what do you know about the cheese in Uruguay? She said, nobody likes cheese. She says there's 3 loves in Uruguay: beef, tanat, and soccer. And tanat is red wine. They're big red wine. I said, well, what about cheese? She said, number 102 on the list. So we learned that it was a very nascent, weird idea to be making goat cheese in Uruguay. It never really caught on. It was more like in the US maybe in the 70s, where it like existed, but it wasn't really popular. People didn't think of it. So, but we did go see some cheesemakers. This man was from Switzerland, I believe. His family was from Switzerland, and he was making more of these wax cheeses.
And you could see, I think, one thread that was consistent is that they just had a lot of pride. You could see this is nothing fancy. They had some wood boards with a stone base. You know, there was nothing. It was very rustic. They were not spending a lot of money, and unlike the previous slide in Portugal, where that was really industrial. Fancy shelving, fancy mats, fancy air circulation system that controls the temperature and humidity. It was like
This looks like a cave.
Yeah, this is what we typically saw, and it's really what we wanted to see.
Yeah, cheese tourism, or cheese journeys as we call them, is an important part.
So Sicily, this was really
2018, I think.
2018 was really a full circle moment for me again. So when Catherine and I were dating, you know, we were just talking about our respective families, and I said my grandfather was from Sicily, and his name was Italian, and she just laughed. She says, you know, there's nobody in Italy. You know, she had spent some time in Italy. She said, there's nobody in Italy named Italian. You know, he probably came over to New York, Ellis Island, and he couldn't speak any English. So they said, your name's Angelo Italian. So I didn't have anything to refute that.
And I didn't really know that it's true, but
I never met anybody I don't think that's true. Is that okay? I've been living a lie for all these years. So we tried to, we had arranged to stay at a hotel in
like an agri-tour, like a farm stay.
farm stay, and we said we wanted to visit cheesemakers, and they said, you know,
Yes.
okay, we're going to do this. We got there, they had made no arrangements, nothing, and they said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And they said, we know a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, and we're going to call them all, and we'll see if we can get something set up for you. So, you know, when you're in Italy, you just have, this was Sicily.
Just have a glass of wine, it'll be okay.
Go with the flow. Things are not planned out very well, but their intentions are good. So this gentleman was one of the stops that we didn't know who he was. We just said, we're going to this farm. Turns out his last name is
Italian.
So he does look like my grandfather, and
You see a
he sort of had
resemblance?
that hook-nosed.
Family resemblance?
And he looked at us and he said, I don't really know if we're related, but, you're welcome to come here. It's an expensive time. Be glad to find out. But one of the interesting things he said, which is typical for farming, and you can relate to wherever you're from, he says, we have cats, we have dogs, we have horses, we have pigs, we have sheep, we have goats. We have everything but cash.
And, that's the life of a farm. It's rich in quality and in many beautiful gifts, not so much cash.
So I think, meeting a potential aunt, I guess a relative of my grandfather was really, touching. But this was another farm, husband and wife that we met in Sicily. And you can see they want to connect with you. And Catherine speaks fluent Italian, which really helps them.
This folks, they told us they found these people, and they said they'd like you to be there at 3:30 in the morning, because that's when they start making cheese. I was like, wait a minute. I mean, I'm a farmer, but this is sort of a vacation for me. What about 6:30? Did we make it 6:30? So compromise was 6:30. We got there at 6:30. They were almost done, but they didn't take us. They were kind enough to take us on a tour.
Wonderful. And just willing to teach and learn. So they were a little bigger industrial, they would have the milk delivered at 3 a.m. They weren't doing their own milking.
It was adjacent. It was maybe less than half a mile from where they were making the cheese. There was a farm that had the animals, so they were kind of partnership.
So this really wasn't what we wanted to do because it takes a lot of space.
And we started around 6 in the morning. And then we generally started with summer. So when the summer we started earlier, in the winter we started later. And even in the winter we started at dark with the cheese making, but the animals would come up when the sun was out. Couldn't milk goats in the dark. They had sun, that's what we didn't have, multi-generations.
And a couple sons. And daughters.
And daughters, whatever. We needed.
So here's an example. This is Sicily. We went to this sheep farm. It was 5 in the afternoon. Again, they didn't tell us where we were going. There was no name on the farm. We show up, they had already milked the sheep for the day, evening shift, and they saw this copper kettle on top of a wood fire. They were making a sheep milk cheese, and I think, so what they do, they're making a hard cheese. They had hot water to make it curdle more and to sort of shrink, and then they put it into a mold. This is the end of the evening where they had made regatta and we were tasting it. So this farm, they told us that the only thing they buy is coffee, sugar,
And salt.
Everything else came from.
So they would take the embers out of that fire and that cheese making, they'd bring it in the house, and that's how they cooked the dinner.
And they were cooking lamb.
And they would process a lamb from the dairy and then bring it in there. So they would talk about farm to table. This was how it worked.
And that's a watchdog in training.
Yeah, that was the donkey. There's their donkey equivalent.
We had another photo that's not here where he was laying on the ground.
He looked exhausted. He was like, holy moly, who told me it was this hard?
And so now we're sort of, after doing all this work, this is what the result was at our farm. So we basically took all this information and we had a milk stand in our milk parlor. We could milk 6
milked
goats at a time.
We milked by hand at first. We eventually got a pipeline.
Yeah.
But
this was essentially, we're milking into a milk bucket.
So you asked, could we milk with the electric one out? Like, here we go. Yeah.
Once you get multiple goats, you can't milk by hand anymore. We're milking 40 goats at a time, twice a day. Your arms get big and your hands get small.
Talk about
Eventually-
carpal tunnel syndrome. You can't do it.
Eventually it catches up to you.
Did you go to any farms that made cheese from goats and sheep on the same farm?
No.
Well, we did have, there were cheesemakers that mixed.
But they bought the milk. They didn't have 2 herds on the same farm. Sometimes they would have partnerships or whatever, but not that they would have 2 herds. Okay. I was going to say, in Alba, in Piedmont, it's pretty common. So the Robiola cheese, sometimes you'll see it even here in Piazza Market, Robiola tre latti, which means 3 milks, and they mix cow, goat, and sheep milks. But Robiola is one of the cheeses that's commonly, and the reason they do that is because the sheep has the shortest lactation, so maybe only 6 months after birthing. Goats usually can go 8 or 9 months. Cows can often go the full year. So especially in the fall, when the volumes are going down, they're able to mix 3 milks and keep the cheese going. It's usually why they do. It's not really often not about taste as much as practice. So our cheese kettle was our second cheese kettle, or first one of the smaller ones. We upgraded after that. Our cheese room.
That's where we drain the curds, curd rack. And you could see that, there's this wall in the back. So we were fortunate that the agriculture, PA Department of Agriculture allowed us to keep the wall exposed because, that's from the 1830s. Like, you can't reproduce that terroir. It's like the photos we showed in New York. We were really grateful. Usually they make you put this white washable surface on it. And
Put a coating on it to keep the particles from falling off, almost like a polyurethane type thing.
But you could see how small this room was. There wasn't really a lot to walk. We had, I think that's a yogurt filler in the background there. We did that for a while, but decided that wasn't really good. So this is our cheese.
Yeah, and this was basically in the cave. It was built under the dairy barn. So we really had a cheese aging cave that was natural. The way the egg barn was built into the earth. So you could have taken those same recipes and moved them, but the cheese would have never been the same because of the terroir, because of the place. This was our 2 best-selling cheeses were Cloud 9 and Black Diamond. Cloud 9 was, I would say, the People's Choice Award. It won a few awards, but Black Diamond won the most professional awards in international competitions. And we called her the Belle of the Ball. She was very beautiful and popular. But Cloud 9, even though she was a little more common looking, that was the People's Choice.
We knew it was a good one when we had a couple of customers that were French origin, and they liked it. So we knew we were in good company then.
But we really tried to connect the landscape and the foodscape, not just figuratively, but literally, and incorporate some of the native plants into the farm. And Nutcracker used the black walnuts from the black walnut trees, which are a native tree, to make this liqueur marinade from the walnuts in the summer. We age that and then marinate the cheese in that liqueur and then eat it the following year. So this was also a very award-winning cheese. It was seasonal cheese. We only produced 2 or 3 months of the year, and we sold every bit of it. Couldn't make enough.
Wow.
Sumac is another native plant. The staghorn sumac, the poisonous one, and those berries are harvested typically in August and can be used as a culinary spice. It's fun cheese.
To keep the deer away.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I have a lot of staghorn, but I would never be able to collect the berries.
Yeah, it's, that's what Quick and Rugby, the 2 rescue dogs. I mean, people, had invested huge things in deer. Those dogs were the best deer control we ever had. When we didn't have those dogs anymore, we could never get the same amount of deer control as the 2 dogs. But elderberry, of course, a beautiful native plant, we're able to make cheese.
Called it very good.
Very good. The sycamore, native tree, we were able to, not many cheeses use grape leaves to wrap the cheese. We were able to wrap the cheese with the sycamore leaves.
Wow.
And, really just the owner's eyes. I don't know how many tasting events we did. Trade shows, restaurants, dinners, lots. But it was well received. The PR was fantastic. That made it work. And I think the journey was really about now that the book's been out for better 6 months, 8 months, whatever. One of the feedback lines that people said to me, "Oh, I thought it would be a book about the farm, but it's a love story," and I found that very touching because it's a love story, I suppose. It's our love story, but it's our love for the land and for the animals and for the community. So it's sort of a love story, a personal farm memoir.
It's interesting how we wrote the book too, because we each had our passion chapters. like I really related to the Sicily chapter. Catherine really loved the Portugal and Uruguay chapter. So we had our interest, and then we would share the chapters with each other. And so, we would make edits. So it was kind of mixed in at the end.
Two voices.
And we didn't really plan it that way. Like, you don't really know how this is going to work out.
There's a thing here, we never know what we're.
Yeah. A friend of mine said about Catherine specifically, she said, you never quite know where she's going, but it's a fun ride. And I think that's the way this book evolved. Like, we didn't really know. We hadn't done this before, but it was really interesting.
We were married 25 years, so, whatever, it must be working. And here we are. So the next chapter is started in 2022. Was a little rough year, I'd say, between COVID and moving and the major life transitions, trying to get things organized. But we are doing the fun things, sailing, fishing, painting, all that stuff. But also doing some consulting work for younger food entrepreneurs, farmers, trying to help share what we've learned to help them be more successful, quicker, faster, better. But our, the Carpe Diem thing is a big part of this, is that we hope we can inspire some people to take a chance to make a change, to try something that they might not do, because I think looking back, we don't regret it. Many people ask us, you think? I'm like, no, never for a minute that I think I should have stayed in my desk. So, thank you for listening. We're here for questions and discussion, and let you have a chance to talk.
Great.
I have one just small question. This term Turo,
Terroir.
how do you spell it in
Terroir is a French word.
terroir? How do you spell it? Okay, and so it means what?
It means, so terre, T-E-R, is earth.
Right.
So of the earth. So it tries to capture the sense of place. It's mostly used in the wine trade,
Right.
because the vine is different if it's grown in this facing a north slope or facing a south slope, where there's more wind off the water, off the sea, or if the soil is sandier or more rocky. So that sense of terroir is saying if you take the same vine and you plant it here or there, you get different wines. And that's because of the terroir. And so cheese, we often don't hear that in the cheese world, because cheese is produced often industrially, like, it's supposed to taste the same no matter what. But we tried to enhance the seasonality of cheese and the differences, and we wanted to make the differentiation an asset, a positive, and not a negative. But it takes a special customer to embrace that. And we did have some James Beard chefs and, really good customers who embraced it. But, some people said, well, it doesn't taste the way it did in March. And we had to explain to them that milk in March is more higher in water. The goats are eating fresher herbs. In the fall, they're eating more fiber, more seeds. The milk has less water in the fall. It's a metabolic thing. Goats relate to daylight, they're alive. And, people kind of lose track of their connection to where their food comes from. So terroir enhances or embraces.
In the case of the cheese, when I showed the cheese room in that wall, so there's yeast and molds, like cheese making is yeast and molds, microbiome cultures, and so we don't really know what kind of yeast and molds were on that wall. We never did that, but we know that it's like several hundred years of microbiology on that wall.
Al thought he could identify the pathogenic ones.
Yeah, we had to do that, but make sure that nobody got sick. But those things would gravitate to the rinds. Even though we were adding yeast and molds to the milk, you had that addition because cheeses will age from the outside in. So the molds that you saw in those cheeses, it's basically breaking the fat and protein down into flavor molecules, and that's where you get your flavor from. In addition to the cultures that we added to develop flavor, to get this layer of complexity. And so I don't think we could have made those cheeses, like if we decided to make those cheeses in this room, they would just be completely different. So
So did you, when you were eating your own cheeses, did you eat the outside or the different, yeah, always?
Yeah, we ate rinds.
We never did any waxing or anything like that. It was natural rind. We brushed them off, of course, but yeah. Because it's really different because we would taste the paste first,
white
like
one.
the inside,
Inside.
and then
That's the base.
we would just taste the rind, and then we taste it together.
And if you go to a cheese competition where there's judges, that's how they do it. They have to, they smell it, kind of like wine in a swirly thing, and then they look at it for color, for form, for the uniformity, if there's too much air pockets or look at the surface, and then they taste the paste, and then they taste the rind. So the rind should, for now, I don't know how many, maybe some of you do, I save all my good cheese rinds, they're natural quality, in the freezer in a Ziploc bag, and I throw them in my soups.
Right.
Cheese rind in your soup adds a lot of flavor.
So were you inspected by,
Yes.
because you're selling this?
Oh, yeah. So we were licensed, permitted, and inspected by the township, the county, the state, and the federal government. And we had third-party audits that were commercial third party. So Whole Foods Market was our largest customer. So we sold to Whole Foods Markets 50 stores from Princeton to DC Metro, Alexandria, and stuff like that. And so some people think the state and federal regulators are your highest critics. Wrong. They only show up once in a while. We had an on-farm lab. We tested our milk and cheese every single day because we didn't want to find out 20 days later when the inspector showed up that we had a problem. Owner's eyes, Mr. Microbe was on it. We tested every single day. And then the third-party audits, we were required to pay for the third-party auditor to come by Whole Foods in order to keep our business relationship with them. And they were, I would say, much more detailed than the government inspections. And then they would publish that third-party audit and share it with Whole Foods. And, I think we always got in the 90s once, we always got 95, 97, 98, but, we were sure that we have to do very, very well. And, the reality of it is, I'll try not to be political about this. If the inspector shows up and says that you have a problem and they're going to set a recall for your cheese, that's fine. They're going to leave and still go home and get their salary, pension, and benefits. The farmer is going to go bankrupt. So, because once you have a recall, you're going to lose your customers. Even if you have insurance, God forbid, if somebody got sick, it's pretty much of an infinite liability. And we did have a lot of insurance, but even if the insurance paid the liability, your business would be gone. So we had so much more to lose than any inspector. And, we're smart enough to know that the self-regulation was much more stringent than any regulation. But on the other hand, the onerous ability to keep the binders of records and proof of process was incredible. It was the hardest job we ever did. And, I worked in financial services, Allen Pharmaceuticals. Those are regulated industries. We knew about regulation, but the food safety regulation was ridiculously onerous. And, they could show up anytime, unannounced. So you were never off.
So what's the retail price of your cheeses?
It varies from 20 to
40.
$40.
I think Italy in New York City used to sell it even for close to $50 a pound.
Wow.
I think. But it's New York City, so. The cheeses were very expensive. Even those prices were even into the 2015, 2012, 2016. So even 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, so those prices were high, and it meant resistance, but it also meant repeat customers. So we had to earn those dollars. When I would do these events more than once, so that you would pick up the piece of cheese, look at the price, and put it back. And say, how can you charge that much for the cheese? Ticked off. Sorry if you feel that way. I hope you try it and decide if you like it. Sometimes they would, and sometimes they would say something more arrogant. And I'd say, I'd like you to spend a week at the farm and decide if I charged you. And of course, it didn't go over very well. But Sometimes I ask, if they wanted to engage, if they were kind of like, oh, how much does your car cost per pound? So why do you, all of a sudden cheese has to earn its price per pound when other things in life you assign a value to by your enjoyment? Why don't you go home and enjoy the cheese and decide if it's worth the $12 or $15 for this piece? Not asking you to buy 100 pounds. Like if you could get $15 worth of enjoyment of this cheese with your family or your friends, that's good.
Or maybe just yourself.
Or just yourself, right, exactly. So that was a cultural thing that was hard to, so we were always polite, but sometimes direct, because people were pretty direct with us, about whether this was okay or not. And again, I think that came back to my family. We didn't my father, for his birthday wanted the best prime rib. And even if we were going to eat leftovers for 5 days, we were going to spend the money for the best aged prime beef for his prime rib. So we had always understood that the value of food was in the enjoyment, not in the price tag. But that's a cultural thing. Not everybody feels that.
I think part of it is education too, because people don't really understand. For example, Whole Foods, they require $2 million worth of liability insurance. Typically it's $1 million. Third-party artists are $500 to $1,000 when you're getting a third-party art. So there's a lot of layers of costs that when you have this farm setting, people are not really thinking about that. And I think what we wanted to do, we wanted to make sure we made enough of a profit to be there next year. And another example is we used to buy hay for the goats, and we had to buy alfalfa hay. It was usually $200 a ton. Initially, by the time we were getting to the end, it was $400 and $500 a ton. We had to stop using organic grain because the price per whatever we're getting 50 pounds was doubled. So we made adjustments to try to keep our costs in line and try to do non-GMO. We did organic as far as we could go. We tried to get really good hay. So it was, we tried to talk to people. When people really wanted to spend the time with us, we would tell them what was happening behind the scenes so that they would understand why why the price is what it is.
Yeah.
So you weren't relied on grazing at all?
Yeah, there's pastures. You can't. Certainly they supplement with that, but in order to get the optimal amount of milk, you have to supplement with alfalfa, something that has the calcium enriched forage in it. And grain is the same thing.
Grain's like a multivitamin for goat.
Yeah. So, in a field, for example, by August, with no water, your fields are depleted. So you really have to make sure that you have the right grain, hay, and pasture combination. So we used to do nutritional analysis monthly to make sure that the goats were getting what they needed.
I think what you have to realize is dairy is like a sport. For a goat, hanging out on a mountain like you see in the movies, that's just like me being lazy. But if a goat is in dairy, they're a decathlete or a tetrathlete. It's a huge output of calories and energy for a goat to be milked twice a day. And to do that, you have to feed them like an athlete. So you have to manage how much calcium, magnesium, selenium, protein that they're getting so that they maintain a healthy body weight and maintain energy and that the milk quality is good. Because they could either lose a lot of weight and start to demineralize their bones if you're getting all this milk but the nutrition's not matching up, or they could become fat. And basically obesity, just like in humans, doesn't produce optimal lactation. So we had to manage them like athletes. So the nutrition, although we wanted the pastures and we wanted them to have sunlight and fresh air and weeds, it wasn't enough to balance their nutrition all year round.
I just didn't want to forget Bess to see if she had any.
Oh, sure.
Bess, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Very interesting.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So managing a herd, what was the lifespan of a goat? Did you have to sell your goats because you
To many.
reproduce?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, to all of that. The goats could live, kind of like big dogs. I think 10 to 15 years was typical. 12, something like that. few goats die. You know, if they make it through the first week, they'll probably be okay for a while. The first week is pretty tenuous for all the reasons we talked about with multiple births and birthing troubles, breech, bad weather, poor attachment in utero. They were born with differences, genetic differences, just like people. We did okay with the ones that we think probably had learning differences. And there were those, for sure. I mean, you said, do goats have them? Yeah, they can be on the spectrum, I promise. Can't tell you a lot about it, but you can see it. But then as they mature, they don't have menopause, so they keep milking. But sometimes they develop other, usually orthopedics first. We don't do knee replacement. Just the whole idea of birthing, getting up and down, going to the milk stand, like sometimes their hips and knees weren't good. And you could see that it was a problem. Those we would try to retire to pet homes where they would either be with racehorses or, just for the pay of it, just for fun. We tried to find some neighbors and we did pretty good on that, retirement homes, because the goats were so friendly, everybody loved our goats. The kids that were born, there's too many kids born each year, so we would have to select. So we would pick for the breeding stock to re-energize the breeding, and then others would go to what I called farmstead, homestead, pet homes, where people might want to milk for their home, but not like a professional dairy. They were like medium quality. And then we only could keep 1 or 2 bucks, maybe 3, but most of the boys went for me. Buck kids. And there was a good market for buck kids, for me. A lot, especially Middle Eastern, Greek, Latino, other cultures for sure. And, some people were upset about that, but all I can tell you is the truth. We tried to process meat 1 year. We rented another field, we raised the goats for meat to weight and brought them to USDA butcher. And we sold them all the meat at $16 a pound in 2 weeks. So, and that was a long time ago. So that was at least 15 years ago. So it was a very good price, and we sold it all quickly, but we still lost money. So it was so expensive to raise these goats and transport them and pay for the USDA processing and packaging. And because you have to have 1 species per day, we had to rent the butcher processing for the day. They couldn't mix they didn't have a lot of goats, so they couldn't mix pork and lamb or whatever with the goat day. So that was expensive, the transportation, the packaging, the freezers. We couldn't do it. So then we realized we had to sell the kits earlier to people who were set up to be able to raise them for meat. And most of the people we sold to were self-processing. In other words, they weren't going under USDA. They were just doing it on their own homestead, farmstead. That's legal, you just can't do that in itself. Right. So, you have to be honest with yourself that the goats all had names, we loved them all, and we named all the boys too, I have to be honest. I think they all had souls, but this is farm life.
Right. Catherine, was it a particular breed of goats?
Yeah, the long-eared ones like Silence in the picture, they're all Nubian goats. Nubians came from Equatorial Africa, and then the British brought them to England, and then there were English Nubians, and then of course British people came to the US, and the Nubians came with them. We have a few goats that had almost no ears or short ears. Those are La Mancha goats that came from the Mexican border, like Texas region. And those were accidental. It started as an accident. It's a great love story. Should I tell us? Rena, so Rena's, she's my girl. Rena. So she, first year, we couldn't get Rena pregnant. It's like, geez, this is not getting pregnant. And we didn't know what to do until this. So long story. We had these friends, and it wasn't coming into heat, never. It was an ice storm in February. And, they're supposed to be done breeding by Christmas. Then, she's still not. She's in heat, So we call these people we know in Manheim, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour's drive. We hook up the horse trailer on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in the ice storm, and we drive there and try to get Rena presents with Buck. And naturally, she looks at this Buck, like in his forehead's like, like, you think, no. and while we're standing there about to lose our minds, down the driveway, this other buck jumps on the fence with his tongue hanging out, and he's throwing his head around, and she's all about it. I'm like, what about that one?
The bad boy.
And the guy, who's still our friend Gary, so that's not our buck. He belongs to our friend, and she's in cancer treatment, and we're just keeping him here. Like, can't we use it? He said, we'll try to call. And actually, she doesn't answer. I was like, we're doing it. I was like, whatever happens, if I have to buy this buck after, if she's upset, I'll make peace. I own this. She was pregnant in moments. It didn't take long at all. And eventually, I mean, it was not an angry situation, but we did buy the buck. And brought him home and used him as an outcrossing because we had such strong bloodlines, and we did a lot of DNA testing and a lot of very careful breeding. But the outcross was very healthy for the herd to have a little bit of that, to get away from the line breeding and have an outcross brought a lot of vigor to the herd. So it turned out to be a blessing. It's crazy.
Our Zoom recording is going to end shortly.
Okay.
To wrap up questions.
Any more questions? Somebody else said anything? Okay. Well, we're here to, if you want a private conversation, we do have some books for sale, but it's also available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and everywhere else. So whether you want to buy a book today, later, or just want to stop with this piece of the farm, all good. We appreciate you being here today.
Great, thank you very much.